Date with a Debut is a Words and Nerds and Breathe Art podcast co-production, recorded on Awabakal Country, and I pay my respects to all elders past and present and extend that to any First Nations people tuning in. Always was, always will be, Aboriginal land. On with the show.
The writing journey began because I'm an insomniac, which I, like a lot of other people, I think. So when I should be sleeping in bed, I'm writing stories in my head.
Hello, I am Nick Wasiliev, former host of Tell Me What to Read, author of When Men Cry, and I'm continuing this series with Words and Nerds, shining a light on debut novelists and their journey to publication. If you're looking for a new book to devour, a new author to discover, this is the place to be. You're looking for writing inspiration, this is the place to be. This is Date with a Debut, because nothing hits you like a first impression. And for our next episode in this series, we're actually going to be doing something a little bit different. Back in 2021, Journey to Words Publishing published a thrilling crime novel titled Shadow Over Edmund Street, which received considerable acclaim and was shortlisted for, among other events, the Ned Kelly Awards, the Davitt Awards, the Nego Marsh Awards, and this year it will be published for the first time in New Zealand under Batemans Books. So I'm joined by the author, Suzanne Frankham, who is based out of Naarm, out of Melbourne, an environmental zoologist, and also who works as a chess teacher on the side as well, to talk about this book and the process of publishing in another country. Suzanne, welcome.
Well, thank you very much, Nick. Lovely to be here.
Thank you so much. You're very welcome. And I will say that, reading that bio, I'm just like, oh, this is an interesting character. So tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to start your writing journey.
The writing journey began because I'm an insomniac, which I, like a lot of other people, I think. So when I should be sleeping in bed, I'm writing stories in my head. And eventually I thought I better go and learn how to write them down on paper. So I went to a local community centre, and I had my first stroke of luck in that the teacher was someone who's since gone on to have quite a great literary career in Australia, and the kind of teacher you wouldn't normally expect to find in a community centre. So I learnt under Lise for 2 years, and she then won the text best unpublished novel. So she stopped teaching and went to took a contract and went on to write 3 novels. And then I had another teacher who was also a writer, and 3 years learning under them really set me on the road. The second teacher that I had was part of the Citizen Crime group. I don't know if you've heard of that.
There are so many amazing groups specifically focused on crime writing. This one I am not familiar with, but I know that there are so many fantastic ones out there that are all about pushing crime. They run the Scarlet Stiletto Award, which is a huge short story award every year. And learning under Lee, I started to focus very heavily on short stories. So the first short story I wrote on an honourable mention in America, and the second one won one of these Sister and Crime Awards. And I thought, oh, this is fabulous. This is really easy. I should keep doing this. Of course, I've since learned then that writing short stories is incredibly difficult. And there was a fair amount of luck involved and doing well in the beginning. But I love writing short stories. So I was derailed for several years really writing short stories, but also learning the fine arts of editing. There's a lot to learn from short story writing. Stop the podcast! Stop the podcast! Hello, it is Nick Wasiliev here, host of Date with a Debut, and I just wanted to reach out and say thank you to all of our incredible listeners on the Words and Nerds platform who have been listening to the podcast and sending messages of support. It has been absolutely humbling to hear from fellow authors, fellow readers, fellow writers, and fellow podcast listeners about the show, and it is a real privilege to turn you guys on to many exciting new and upcoming authors. The reason why I'm reaching out here is because one of the groups I've heard the most from is a lot of aspiring writers who have been wanting to learn more about the actual process of getting your book into publication. How do you complete a manuscript? How do you find a publisher? How do you complete the editing process? And how do you get that book printed and into stores? Of course, we cannot fully cover it in an episode of the podcast every single week, but I have another podcast that I dropped in 2021 called A Little Idea. This podcast essentially covers my entire process that I went with my debut novel, When Men Cry, from writing to publication to promotion. Over the course of this 5-part mini-series, I sit down with some of the biggest names in the Australian publishing scene to cover this entire process front to back. And the best part, this entire series is completely free and available to listen wherever you get any of your podcasts. Please enjoy this brief snippet from episode 3 of A Little Idea, where I chat with my editor Sylvia Ballog around misconceptions that people have around editors and the value that they can bring to your manuscript.
To me, every world is exciting. It's just really, and I'm not a writer, so to see people come up with these creative worlds, it just always blows me away. So I get very, very enthused about it.
How do you kind of work your way through those kind of misconceptions that people might have towards editors in your own book?
Okay, sure. I think
I'm worried that's like a really loaded question.
No, not at all. I think probably some of the some people may think that they don't need an editor at all. Some people think that an editor is actually like a proofreader, which they are in some ways, but proofreading is another sort of profession itself, where that they just expect the editor to maybe correct spelling and things like that. But what an editor really does is that, like you said, they're there to, and like I mentioned, they're there to hone that manuscript, to get the absolute best out of the author in that work.
To hear more, head to the links in the description or head to my website, nickwasiliev.com, and check out my podcast, A Little Idea, and start your own writing journey. All right, back to Date with a Debut. What is Shadow Over Edmund Street about?
It was always the story of Edwina, and Edwina gets killed on page 1. It's not a spoiler to say that. So the book then is really the unraveling of her life. And I struggled a lot initially with the structure of the book, because I didn't want it to be just a straight police procedural. I wanted it to be her story. And for that, you need to be able to step outside of the confines of the police. So in the end, it's told from 3 points of view. That's the policeman, Alex, from Rose, one of Edwina's friends, and from, because they're a little bit clumsy, they tip off the killer. You also see it from the point of view of the killer. So I stole really that idea from Kate Atkinson. Is that the right way to say it? Great writers, like you can pillage and steal if you like, but the trick is what you do with it. And I will say I love this. I love the change of voice, and I love what you've done. Before we dive into the meat of the book itself and talk about these characters that you've crafted, we're in, again, as mentioned at the top of the podcast, we're in a unique situation in this series, because up until this point I've been talking with authors whose books are either just set for release or are just about to come out, or they've just come out. But yours, in Australia at least, has been out for a little while. Came out in 2021. Congratulations on all of the shortlistings. That's the ticket of approval. How has the reaction been? Has it surprised you? To find myself shortlisted for the Ned Kellys was a huge surprise. When we were putting them into competitions, I almost said to Jen, "Well, don't bother about the Ned Kellys," because I thought it would be, such a competitive thing. So yes, it was. But of course, this has been interwoven with COVID. And it was also, there was a lot of angst going on behind the scenes, because the publishing house closed down, And shortly after that, unexpectedly, the principal died. So there was a high drama behind the scenes, even though it was being shortlisted. And basically, the book's life in Australia ended at that point. So that was the end of Shadow Over Edmund Street.
Look, I think the fact that it got attention and interest from a critical perspective is still really something fantastic, and it's great that it now has a second life and it continues on and goes internationally. Let's talk about this book, because crime and detective novels are very much the zeitgeist right now. They're really popular. There's a lot of fantastic writers out there producing great work. But even then, this book surprised me in lots of ways. It was lots of things that I loved in it. The person who has been murdered, Edwina, found strangled in a park miles from her home. And as the police go digging, she's in the midst of a life change. She's making a lot of changes in her life. But even still, the fact that where she is found is still very out of character for the women, for the woman that the police paint a picture of in this story. How did this concept come into your life? Where the hell did this come from?
Well, I told you I don't sleep a lot, Nick, so there's a lot of time picking up stories. Look, I grew up in one of these suburbs, and I've lived in 3 or 4 countries, and there's always one of these suburbs, inner city suburb, gone derelict over 100 years, and then there's been this great revival. So Edwina, her family lived in Ponsonby for over 3 generations. She lived a very restricted life. I knew lots of people like this. And then obviously, as the suburb was revitalised and changed, new people came in, and it was just an absolute, just a shock, I suppose. So how was she found in a part of the city that she normally wouldn't be there? Well, you'll have to read the book to find out. But it's all about the deep, dark secrets that people are trying to protect. Deep, dark secrets from a long time ago. Yeah.
Yes, we don't want people. We are trying to keep it spoiler free, but it is. I just love this concept, and particularly as well. Often it is the case with crime novels is that there's a lot of tropes and stereotypes, and particularly around the whole idea of the lone detective. It is often something that has been done to death in a lot of crime novels. I found it so refreshing that you've got one of these viewpoints, Alex Cameron, the detective. So they're surrounded by a real well-oiled machine of detectives who are clearly very diligent at their work. Which makes the discoveries that they find about Edwina even more surprising. In that it just feels so out of character for her to be where she is. Talk me through how you put together this well-oiled team, first and foremost, of detectives that Alex is surrounded by.
Gosh, these are tricky questions, Nick. I have to say that in this book, the surrounding characters came first. I loved Edwina. I loved Mr. Chan. The surrounding characters came first. And I really didn't want this to... look, I'm a bit over these angst-ridden detectives. I just wanted something a little bit different. I think as much as I love crime novels, there's a whole pathway that's just been trod so much lately. So, and I can't, whatever I write, there's always a little bit of humor in it. I can't help that. I don't know. I'm not answering your question, am I? Because
I like it. I like the place. I like the space that you've come from, because that is one thing about a lot of crime novels these days, that there is a lot of angst in them. And again, you touch on it as well. There is a lot of humor in this story, and also that you want detectives to be good at their job and what they do. And Alex is really a very diligent worker, and I found it it added into the story and the intrigue a lot more, because I clearly saw that Alex was really good at what they do, which made the discoveries we find even more surprising. It just enhanced the story so much more as it was unfurled to me, as I kept turning the page. It was something I just really loved.
Well, it's all about insights, not heavy on procedure. That's the difference that I tried to create. I'm not really keen on the kind of, in fact, I'm disappointed in a lot of the stuff that's coming out of Britain at the moment, where it's just overwhelmed with procedure. And for me, it's always been about the story. And so this book is light on the police, but it's hopefully heavy on insights. Alex is a bit of an instinctive person, perhaps. In this book, you have two investigations going. You have the police investigation, and then you have the investigation by Edwina's friends.
Yes.
The neighbourhood investigation, and it's where these two overlap. And Alex picks up one or two insights, and that pushes them on the right pathway. So I really wanted it to be more about Edwina and her life, absolutely, than just the police. Absolutely.
And let's take this time as well to shout out that community, particularly Rose, recent friend of Edwina, who becomes very important to those insights. And you touched on him earlier, but I just want to say I just love Mr. Chan. I could tell you enjoyed writing that character. Just such a great voice who strengthens every scene he's in. I love these side characters, and I find it interesting that you mentioned this is where the story started for you.
The story started with, in my mind, with Alex and Mr. Chan sitting outside on the footpath, outside the window with all the bits of Chinese porcelain, and having a cup of tea. Most of it got cut, actually, but from the final book, but that's still embedded in my brain. And the character I loved most, of course, was his granddaughter, because who wouldn't want to be driving a rose-coloured convertible Mercedes? I mean, come on. And have that level of confidence at that age. Not something I had, but
you always wish for it. You could have that sort of confidence. Oh, there's one other thing that I really like, and that, of course, this book's set in Auckland. And I really enjoyed that, because I feel like there's not that many stories of this nature set in a place like that. I've found myself probably in the last 12 months gravitating towards a lot of New Zealand fiction of late. So more recently, it's been out for a little while, but Nobody Is Ever Missing by Catherine Lacey, or In Amber's Wake, and more recently by Christine Lenens, of course, which I love that one because it then presented New Zealand in the 70s during the controversy of the Rainbow Warrior and the Springbok tour. And it was a side to New Zealand that fascinated me, because it was a side that I'm not as familiar with. I have family in South Island, and I've traveled to New Zealand a lot, and it's a side that I was not as familiar with. What was it like putting New Zealand on the page? And also, what do you think, how important it is, do you think, that we should actually start to feature New Zealand more in a lot more of our fiction novels? Because it feels like it's due.
Yeah, there's an awful lot of New Zealand crime writers at the moment, and I got blown away. I mean, I was blown off. I got shortlisted in these stories, but of course, Jacqueline Bublitz won.
Yes.
The one New Zealand wonder kid at the moment. And when I write short stories in New Zealand, they go on a completely different tack, and there's angst and beaches and, all sorts of emotional whatever that doesn't win me prizes at all, I can tell you. But as much as I love the stories, I think part of a crime novel is that not only do we get the crime, but we get the insight into a different environment. So this is why Scandi Noir was so popular, because we were getting crime set in an environment that people had really not seen a great deal of. So it's almost like a 2-for-1, you know. It went crazy because suddenly we were seeing Iceland featured in crime novels. And so a little bit of that perhaps happening. People are seeing a little bit of Auckland as well, which they haven't seen a great deal, or New Zealand, which they haven't seen a great deal of in books. But it's very vibrant, the crime scene.
I could honestly keep talking about the book, but I also want to ask you a little bit about your journey to publication, because it looks like a very interesting road, well traveled. What was that like?
It was horrendous, as I think it is. You know, if I was saying to someone, you want to write a book, then don't start at my age and don't imagine that if you write a good book, you'll have a chance of having it published. That's not the way it works. I think if you really want to have a book published, go to university, do a creative writing course, or go to TAFE, do creative writing, because your lecturers then will have a pathway for you. But just sending something in off the slush pile is very, very difficult. So my road to publication was, you know, long and tortuous like most other people's. And really, all I can say to somebody is just keep sending stuff away, because every now and again you might just get lucky. And that's pretty much what happened with me. I think I built up a resume with short stories, got a fair few wins. So that meant that when I sent a book in, I had, you know, something behind me that was to show that I was a reasonable writer. So people would perhaps read the synopsis and give it a go. But really, in the end, it was a very small indie Melbourne publishing house that picked up the book. Yeah.
And I honestly think that that's like, I was chatting with Meg Vertigan, who also went with a smaller publishing house up here in Newcastle. And I think that there actually are a lot of positives that can come from going with a small publishing house. I know that you went through quite a lot of challenges during the time of COVID as well, that kind of, I think, affected can affect the actual, did have an effect on the actual experience. But now with this one, you're going through Bateman to get it out into New Zealand. What was the journey of then also adapting it for an international, to kind of move, well, international, quote unquote, because it's also for home. What was that experience like?
The experience with Bateman was really quite extraordinary. I was talking to somebody in a bookshop, telling them how, you know, the book had kind of fallen over. And she said, I'll go and speak to Louise at Bateman. So I spoke to Louise at Bateman, and they basically just read the book, took it, and that's that. It's been wonderful. So, I was going to say that the book has also was sold to Awabakal, which do audio and large print worldwide. And it wasn't altered at all either. So the only problem for the New Zealand audience, and I can blame this squarely on my husband, was that I had duvet in the book, and then he said, no, it's doona. And of course, every New Zealander that's read it has gone, oh, doona? What's a doona? You know what it is.
Absolutely, yes. It's I know. You asked what a doona is. We know what a doona is in Australia, but like that's so funny. It's the small little language things, and it's funny. I was going to ask you about. We were talking about it before we started recording about what would it have been like making adaptations for the New Zealand audience, and you were like, there was barely any, because the audience is. Like, apart from those small changes in words and types, the audience is quite similar to Australia, which, what a contrast to, you know, hearing about all the changes that you have to make whenever you have to get a book published in America, for example.
Well, New Zealand, there are differences, like a cell phone. Do we call them cell phones? What do we call them? Mobiles. And in New Zealand, they're cells. Now, zucchini and courgette, you know, the problem is I've lived in America, Australia, New Zealand, and the Philippines, and I forget where the words belong. Do you know whether it's courgette or a zucchini? I don't. I call them Well, they're both the same thing, but so I haven't met that yet. But the next book, Thieves Bay, will be published in New Zealand, and I expect they'll have a bit to say about the language then.
Oh, you've led me on to you've beat me to my next question, because I was going to ask what's next for you. You have another book in the works.
Almost done. It's with my own editors at the moment. Yeah. So I actually started writing, my first articles were published in a yachting magazine. And I know very little about yachting, but I have ended up sailing in different parts of the world because, you get dragged around sometimes. So this Thieves Bay starts off, I don't know if you know this, but every year about 400 or 500 yachts stream into New Zealand from the Pacific. They come out of the Pacific into New Zealand to get away from the hurricane season. And they arrive around about November. So, yeah, a little bit to do with overseas yachting.
Oh, exciting. That'd be exciting to check out something that I'm, again, not as familiar with, something new to check, and I'll be keeping a watch on that next book.
Yeah, it's been quite a performance, but anyway, we're almost there.
We're now at the part of the podcast where I hit you with some rapid fire questions. Do not be scared. It's okay. You just give me the first answer that comes to your head.
Really? Okay.
What's your favorite book that you've read in the last 12 months?
Oh, really? How could you do this to me? I can honestly say that because I've had my head down writing Thieves Bay, I've hardly read a book in the last 12 months.
I don't blame you. That's fair.
But I've just picked one up from the library, and it's my Icelandic author whose name I can't pronounce. Interesting. Do you know any Icelandic authors? The names of any Icelandic authors?
It's the world's hardest language, so probably not. If I try to pronounce it, I'll completely butcher it.
It's wonderful anyway, and it's something like hang on, I've got it written here. Arnolda Indrisson. There we are. That's my best effort.
Love it. Do you have a favorite word?
There's almost word. If you come from New Zealand, I can always tell a New Zealander because they use the word actually. So I try to avoid favorite words. Ticks.
Where is your favorite place to read? Do you like to read in bed? Do you like to read on the couch? Or do you like to read out the back in the shade on a sunny afternoon?
Yes, exactly. You've got it. Out the back, in the shade and in the sun. A little bit in the sun, a little bit in the shade. Yes, perfect.
I like that. Which crime writer would you like most to meet? So this could be either living, dead, whoever it may be. Who would be the one crime writer that you're like, you know what, I really want to have like a coffee with you and just listen to you?
Well, John McCarthy is the kind of person, he writes the sorts of books that I like because it's all about the mystery, not the crime. Ian Rankin, of course, is amazing. But yeah.
I could honestly chat to you all day, but I'm aware that you are a very busy person. So I'll finish off by saying to everyone listening, you should go and check out Shadow Over Edmund Street. It's published by Journey Towards Publishing in Australia and Batemans Books in New Zealand, where it will be out this month. We're recording in May, but will be out this month. Hope our listeners in New Zealand check it out. And if you like the show, drop Words and Nerds a review. Tell us what you think and who you'd like to hear from next. I'll finish off simply by saying, Suzanne, thank you so much. It's been lovely having you on.
Thanks very much, Nick. It's been a joy.